All right, welcome back to Checkpoint. Our discussion now, remember, we're asking you if you are happy with the recommendations of the IEBC report that was released last week. It's to be tabled in Parliament this week. Please keep your comments coming in as we discuss this tonight here on the show. So let me introduce my panelists to you one more time here on Checkpoint tonight. On my extreme right, we have George Kegoro, who is the Executive Director of the Kenya Human Rights Commission, and he's also part of the Kura Yangu Sauti Yangu movement, a group of civil society organizations that have come together. That is George Kegoro, who joins us tonight. Right next to him, we have Senator Moses Kajwang, and who's a regular here on Checkpoint and no stranger to our viewers. Thank you for joining us. And then right next to him, we have Onyango Olo, who's the Secretary General of the National Alliance Party. They'll soon be folded up, so we'll wait and see what happens in the coming days and months. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on Checkpoint tonight. So naturally, I think we start with you, George. There was a press conference, late last week, raising some of your concerns with the IEBC report. If we can just go through them briefly.
Yes, we've got concerns with the IEBC report. First of all, we expressed concerns with the process. The process was exclusive because whereas the issues that the committee was dealing with concern and touch on players other than Jubilee and Court, the agreement ultimately excluded everybody else when they set up a joint parliamentary committee to deal with those issues. So that's a process problem. Another process problem is how much time this process was given. It's been rushed. It had to be rushed because whereas we've had these problems for a long time concerning IBC, there was no effort, no attempt whatsoever to provide leadership around solving those problems until very late. So we've had necessarily to rush, and this was, I think, by design on the part of the political leadership in the country. So those are two process problems. But substantively, we've got a number of concerns that we've raised in our press statement last week. The first concern we've got is to do with the fact that you've got a select committee that is going to be composed of faith leaders that is going to lead the process of the selection panel. Mm-hmm. Now, faith leaders once upon a time represented or were the embodiment of consensus in this country. Mm-hmm. That is not necessarily the case anymore. They've taken sides in a manner that polarizes the country. They've increased the polarization through the positioning they've taken around, for example, the constitutional reform process. They went no and campaigned no around the ICC question. They abandoned the victim and sided with authority and sided with the top dog around the ICC issues. So they don't necessarily represent public consensus. So when this process now has been given to them, there's one reason and only one why this has been given to them, because the political leaders can easily control and manipulate them. So that is another problem that we have with how this has gone. Now there are other issues that we have. Onyango wants to jump at me. I don't know why.
Onyango wants to jump in. We'll come back to you in a moment, because I want to talk about the time frame and what you feel your contribution was to the process. But Onyango, you wanted to respond to that?
I think let us accept that the report that has come out of the Parliamentary Joint Senate and National Assembly Committee is a consensus document. Both parties, or Kenya, had literally been striven down the middle, with some of us who had maintained that constitutionalism had to be respected to the end. CORD had taken their line. But the greatest thing is that at the end of the day, we were able to come up as a nation, to discuss, to deliberate, to listen to each other, and come out with a report that is generally accepted on both sides. Mm-hmm. In a negotiation of this kind, you must accept that not everything you seek, you get. We did lose a lot of things that we probably would have loved to see in that report. Mm-hmm. CORD may have given in to some of their demands, because As you all know, Kenya is a constitutional democracy. Being a constitutional democracy, we are governed by our constitution, and one of the values spelled out in Article 10 is the core value of participation, that citizens have a right to participate and decide their future. So Kenyans having participated, having given their views, and the committee having come up with this report. It may not be the best report in the circumstances, but it's what would serve us. It is what Kenyans have generally said.
With the time frame given.
Move forward within the time frame.
Within the time frame given. But then many say then it is not exactly democratic. It wasn't inclusive. What do you say to that? Because many say that the members of the Joint Select Committee showed statesmanship, and this was not a Cord and Jubilee affair, but some say you locked yourselves up as Cord and Jubilee in this room, came up with a boardroom decision. I mean, just last week here we hosted former presidential candidates, Abdu Badida, James Ole Kiapi, and they complained that they were not part of it. I've hosted Martha Karua again on the same issue, and they say this issue of IEBC was driven by Cord, which then forced Jubilee to sit on a table, and then this was just a deal crafted for the two big coalitions. What do you say to that?
Thank you, Yvonne. The backdrop to this select committee is very well known. There were people who died in Kisumu, in Migori, in Homa Bay, in Siaya. In my county, I still have people nursing wounds, gunshot wounds. They're still lying in hospital as a result of the protest that we staged to ensure that the issue of IEBC came up as a pertinent issue of national discussion. There was a lot of loss of property. There was a lot of loss of economic assets as a result of the picketing that we did in line with the Constitution. When this select committee was established, you will recall that our position as CORD was to set up a broad-based team that would reflect the face of the nation and that would discuss certain issues of national importance. And our brothers from the Jubilee side, and I do remember the president called his team at State House and proposed that for that kind of discussion to be undertaken, it had to be done within the confines of Parliament. And so that's how we found ourselves where we were. If we would have dug in, Yvonne, we would still be on the streets and more people would have been dying. So it's important to appreciate the give and take that preceded the setup of the Select Committee. As far as its work is concerned, and the issue of inclusivity, we had registered some concerns that an undertaking of Parliament might be a little bit daunting to the common man, that they might not find it very easy for them to participate. But we must ask ourselves, the framework of public participation in this nation, is it adequate? I know civil society, I know religious bodies, trade unions, and even professional bodies presented memoranda to the Select Committee. So there was some framework of public participation. If you look at the output of the work of this Select Committee, Yvonne, what worries me is just implementation. Whatever the committee has recommended is a midway, is kind of midway between what CORD was demanding for and what Jubilee had stood for. The key thing is, do we have time to implement? Do we have the political will to implement? And within Parliament, with this Select Committee, its life having ended, the Justice and Legal Affairs Committees of the National Assembly and of Senate, the one of the National Assembly has already pronounced itself. Chepkonga does not believe in the work of the Select Committee. So who is going to midwife the implementation of the recommendations of this Select Committee?
All right.
That is what we're
I'd like us to address what George brought up, and he's talking about this the selection panel. It's got members of the Parliamentary Select Committee and religious leaders on the other hand. There is no representation outside of that that would then make Kenyans believe that it is a little bit more inclusive in terms of determining who then heads the commission.
It's very clear in our constitution that we are not, this is not a religious state, this is not a theocracy.
But it does seem to be that way, especially with religious leaders having, a bigger say.
We've got this perception that religious leaders are holier than thou. I mean, we've seen them getting drunk and causing accidents along the road. And I think that particular approach was quite contentious. But let's ask ourselves, what does the law currently say? The first schedule of the IEBC Act make certain provisions and certain guidelines for selection of new commissioners. I think what we have come out with this Select Committee is much better than what is in the first schedule of
so you
the
agree
IEBC
with
Act.
that? Okay.
It is not the best, but it is more progressive than what is in the current law.
George?
Okay, Yvonne, I think Okay, what we currently have is untenable because it would have had placed all the control directly in the hands of people that work for the government, that the president has control over. And because the president is not just president but also a political player on behalf of his party, then that would not have been tenable. So what has been put in place, the substitute of that, which is get religious leaders, is actually really get proxies of politicians instead of public servants.
So you're saying
to do
religious
this.
leaders are proxies of politicians?
Yes, I'm saying religious leaders easily find it favorable to play as political operatives.
Okay.
But let me make this point, Yvonne, which I think has not been raised.
Right.
It is the central responsibility of the committee was to determine how to exit the current IBC, and that is something that we need to discuss here.
Yeah.
So the panel, the committee recommended that that a mechanism be found for IBC to exit.
Yeah.
Now, what surprised me is that it did not deal with the exit itself. It merely recommended that somebody else within government should deal with that after the tabling of the report.
Yeah.
So that's a bit confounding.
And there's also
But
the immunity issue.
Okay, yeah, I was coming to
Yeah.
that. There are two issues actually. There's the immunity issues and there's a payment. Now, if Senator Kajwang resigned today from Homa Bay as senator, he would be paid up to the last day he works. He wouldn't expect to be paid for the remainder of the term of office up to 2017. That is the law. Why would we pay other officials like IBC more money than what they've worked for? There is no legal basis whatsoever to give a financial compensation to them for time other than what they've actually worked for. So this discussion going on that we're going to give public funds to people because they've resigned from office is actually an exceptionalism that is not justifiable in law. When Willie Mutunga retired at this year, last month, a year before his term of office ended, he did not expect, he did not demand, and he was not paid money
But they say this is a political settlement, George, under the
a political,
circumstances.
it's a good thing. They said, you see, the recommendation says they should have a political settlement in accordance with the law. So that it draws us to the law. What does the law say? The law says you get paid for time served. You've got to give me a law that allows you to be paid for time that you could have served had you not resigned.
Okay, let's have Wanyangolo respond.
You know, Yvonne, it's very interesting and usually quite wonderful that the civil society would always want to exercise power without responsibility. They would come and throw in spanner into the works. And when things get out of hand, they laugh and stand by outside. From the onset, we did make it clear that if we were to follow the constitutional provisions of getting the IEBC commissioners or disbanding the IEBC, then time would not have allowed us, because basically a tribunal would have had to be set or to be put in motion. If we were to take even the average life of a tribunal, we were definitely getting into the electioneering period before a new commission was put in place. The law itself is clear. You are not going to appoint new commissioners when the other commissioners are being investigated, because they are still substantially commissioners. Now, for that matter, CORD itself had expressed and had made the public get this impression that these people were untenable. A political decision and a political resolution had to be found, and a joint committee of both houses was constituted. And remember, people were given a chance to make presentations. Of course, on behalf of Jubilee, we did appear and made our presentations. IEBC did appear, the commissioners, if I remember, and they also made their position very clear. They said, we are innocent, but for the sake of this country, we are willing to step aside on the following conditions. You give us immunity, you pay us for the period unserved, and if you are not ready to do that, we are ready, willing to face the tribunal.
Okay.
Now, the committee found itself between a rock and a hard place. hold onto these people and they face a tribunal, then you reach the electioneering period before this matter is settled. Or strike a middle ground, a political position, and therefore we must compliment this joint committee for the work they have done.
Okay, so a political settlement,
Yes.
considering the circumstances and the time. George?
Yeah, the committee's report says a political settlement in accordance with the law.
Okay.
So we can't ignore that part of the
All right, George,
recommendation
what
in
would your
accordance with the law.
alternative be?
The
if you were
alternative
given
would-
a chance?
There are two choices,
Yeah.
really, Yvonne. The choices are that the IBC, as is currently constituted, stays in office and runs elections, and we will have to deal with the consequences of them staying in office.
Would you
and
trust
running the-
IEBC
No, I don't
as-
trust IBC to run elections.
So you would be willing to, though, allow them to
No,
conduct
you're
the
asking for
2017?
the choices.
Okay.
So I'm spelling out the
All right.
choices.
Okay.
One choice is if they feel they can run elections and they feel that they would run elections in a manner that would be acceptable to the players, they would say we've done nothing wrong, so let's get on with elections. That's one choice. The other choice would be they walk away unconditionally. Because if they were to walk away unconditionally tomorrow, then that would be an act of sacrifice on their part, because that would be the act that says they actually care for this country. These things of them saying, give us money, and otherwise we are going to stay here and bring everybody down, it is not an act of, that is like Samson, bringing down the whole house unless their welfare is first secured. The only way in which leadership can be exercised under the circumstances is for them to say, we are taking the risk that somebody could find that there was wrongdoing on our part, but because we know that we have confidence that we've never done anything wrong, such a thing will never be found on us. So we don't want that immunity, keep it, because we've done nothing wrong. We don't want any money from anybody because we've not earned it. We'll go away and we'll walk away and somebody else come and run elections. If they did that tomorrow, this will cure the problem. But we've got a problem in this country where people take public office as though it was personal property. So they're saying, pay me, and in the meantime, because I suspect I've done things wrong, give me immunity. So that is what you guys are giving us in the country. There's a choice that you're not discussing. The choice is IBC that is quite close and listens to one side of the negotiation, is capable of walking away and leaving everybody alone, and then we can get on with our lives as a country.
Okay.
Yvonne, we are obviously not talking about Justice Mutunga in the IBC. Justice Mutunga willingly left office before his time was up. Men of such character are rare in this country. We've got commissioners who have withstood all the tear gas that was being hurled outside their offices, who have disregarded the loss of lives, who have disregarded the voice of God, and they've decided to stay put.
But some
Now,
say that the Joint Select Committee willingly accepted this recommendation from the IEBC commissioners, rather than also putting another alternative on the table and saying, as George says, well, you have the opportunity to go, we're not paying you a cent, but that it almost seemed like the IEBC commissioners dictated the terms of their exit.
Yvonne,
Exactly.
I think that particular recommendation was one of the laziest recommendations out of the report of the Select Committee. Because when you say a mechanism be found,
And yet it came out.
yet all
And
of
yet
us
it was
believed
agreed to.
that this was a committee that was going to find that mechanism, I think that was quite lazy. But I see another approach.
Okay.
Yes, Article 251 talks of how these people
Can be
can
removed.
exit office through
Okay.
tribunals.
Right.
And we have realized that that is untenable. It is too long. We've got less than 1 year to the next elections. The other option was for them to resign willingly, do a Justice Mutunga style.
Was
And
that option ever placed on the table?
Yes,
It has always been there.
And they refused
They
it.
declined.
Yvonne,
And
that
the
is
Joint
why we've
Parliamentary
been-
Select
that-
Committee was happy to accept it
Yvonne,
because
that
they
is why
declined?
we've been picketing, asking them to resign. We've not been telling them to go and face a tribunal.
Okay,
Ask
Senator,
them
I
to
think we're
resign.
past the
now,
picketing
let me
stage.
give you the third,
All right.
and just to give that background.
Okay.
The third option is if I hire you on a 5-year contract, who are the employers of the IBC? The people of Kenya.
Right.
If I give you a 5-year contract and somewhere halfway I decide that you are no longer you are not representing my interests very well, you know, I can opt to terminate your services,
Okay.
and you're entitled to seek something called breach of contract, which then becomes the circumstance under which there is a consideration to pay these guys for the time in which they would have served. Otherwise, if we keep talking about this thing of these guys must leave office without a penny, then they're not going to leave office because the select committee did not make any binding recommendation. They can decide to hold on, and this country is going to have a crisis. Some of us are going to go back to the
Well,
streets.
that's a change of tone
just-
from what court
yes.
was picketing for on the streets.
Thank you so much. But I just want to add something small on this. Here you have a contract with your employer, but under that contract you have also spelled the circumstances under which you can be relieved of your responsibility and the process that must be followed. In this case, Article 251 would have to be instigated before the commissioners would be asked to come out.
Yeah.
Now, you cannot turn up and say, I want you to go, Yvonne, I've found you to be wanting, you must go, but now we are not following Article 251, and still again blame you for saying, I am not going unless we follow the procedure that we agreed upon.
Right.
So
Right. And
I still want to just address a little on what my colleague Kegoro has said. You cannot say that there are alternatives when the Constitution boxes you to a zero game. You cannot go anywhere other than through the tribunal. And these gentlemen and ladies had said and made their case clear. Either you give us ABCD, this arrangement, we come out willingly, you don't give us that immunity, or we are ready to face the tribunal.
okay, all right. The Constitution
Yvonne,
was
let me just
yes.
make this point.
Yes,
You see,
very
IBC talks about, they are the ones who talk about a political settlement.
Yeah.
They recognize when it is in their favor, there is something called the law, but there's something called politics. And they want the favor of a political settlement in their favor. But they don't but when it comes to people saying, as a matter of politics, we don't want you to run this IBC, they throw at you the law. They say the law protects us. So politics should only work in their favor. Politics is important when it secures the interest, which is give us a safe exit.
Okay.
But when, as a matter of politics, when people have decided that politically you can't run elections, they throw at you the law. But
All right.
but then when they want favors, they say we are willing to consider politics because then that is where we have whatever we've got.
But never forget that Kenya under Article 2 is a multi-party constitutional democracy. So no matter how much you play your politics, no matter how much gerrymandering you want to conduct, that pillar remains. So that when you push someone to the wall and he says, let's go to the Constitution, you are bound, you must go there.
All right.
And in this case, we realized that that was simply untenable for electioneering purposes.
Okay, gentlemen, I'd like us to move the conversation a little bit. And first, to start with you, George, why bring up these grievances now? Why did you not make any presentation to the Joint Parliamentary Select Committee, and perhaps some of your views would have been incorporated in that?
Okay, I think this country, Yvonne, is very badly run, and what is going on what has been going on in the last 1 month is further evidence that this country is extremely badly run. We had elections in 2013. The elections had problems. Those problems were not dissimilar to the problems we had in 2007. There's been ample time for everybody to sit together and talk about those problems long before the crisis that we now have. In 2013 itself, we were calling for dialogue ourselves, apart from COD. But this is something that has been pushed away methodically until now. It was clear, and I personally wrote in a newspaper column that I write regularly that Jubilee will finally bring everybody together, but it will do so in the 11th hour. It will do so when it is too late for anything meaningful to come up from a discussion. So that is exactly what has happened. So they want to put us in this situation where when it is this late, we get into a preordained, predetermined space where they decide what we want to do, and then they'll say everything is fine. Let's go on.
To be fair, my question was the Parliamentary Select Committee had 30 days to put together its report and to hear views from the public. Now, several people went and made their report there. Was that not enough time for perhaps Kura Yangu, Sauti Yangu to go and make their views known?
I haven't talked about we have had other problems with the Select Committee's mandate other than the timelines. I feel personally, and we've said as Korango, and that's part of what we said in the statement, that the issues that are being discussed at IEBC, I mean by the select committee, are not inclusive of all the problems that this country has got. So participating in the processes that have gone on actually blesses that process, gives it a legitimacy it does not deserve to begin with. Now, the question I ask is this. If you had the IBC out, the current IBC out, and you had new IBC commissioners tomorrow, will the country have free and fair elections? I don't think so. And why won't the country have free and fair elections? Because the people who run elections are not just the people in IBC. There are other people outside of IBC who are responsible for running elections. Who are those people?
So then what's the way out, George? It looks like we're damned if we do, damned if we don't. Whether we have new commissioners or not, it's still being run by an outer hand?
There's a big outer hand that determines how elections are run in this country other than just the IBC commissioners. That is not a discussion that has been had. That is not a discussion about which there's a forum to have at this time.
Okay, so you feel being part of that would have legitimized the Joint Parliamentary Select Committee and its work?
We said in our statement that we feel that this country needs a national dialogue ahead of the next elections, irrespective of what the Select Committee has done. What the Select Committee has done, it has provided maybe a basis for the IBC commissioners to exit and maybe another set of commissioners to be appointed. To that extent, its work is useful. And we've said that. Okay. But what we've said is that getting rid of IBC is necessary, but it is insufficient to give this country free and fair elections because there are problems that this country has that relate to IBC, players who interact with IBC, but those problems are not being discussed at the moment.
Fair enough. I want to just pose this to Senator Kajwang here because CORD was very categorical during the protests about the IEBC commissioners and some of the wrongdoing, and Chicken Gate came up. Yet, CORD then puts pen to paper in this report that says the committee made no findings on the allegations against members of the commission and the secretariat. So some would start to ask, then what was the protest for? When you made all of this noise, made some very serious allegations against commissioners, the report comes out saying the committee made no findings, then it just takes us back to square one. If the committee finds no findings on the allegations against the commissioners, what was this whole exercise about?
Yvonne, I agree with George because the genesis to this is the scope of the select committee. Remember, it took more than 7 days just to agree on what the select committee was going to deal with. The president himself made it clear that the select committee will deal exclusively with the issue of IEBC. And in that, the issues within which this committee would have looked into were narrowed down significantly. Remember, when this committee was sitting, the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee was listening to a petition brought against the IBC. And therefore, I don't think the Select Committee had adequate time and had adequate scope to get into the depth and the details of the accusations that had been raised against these commissioners. That had been done by the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee.
Okay, we have just about a minute to go, and I'd like to also give Onyango Law, don't worry, you'll have your time to respond, not worry. But I just want to continue on this issue because if the whole aim of this whole process was saying the IBC commissioners have an issue, that there's integrity, there's accountability issues, the country was brought to a standstill by a number of those protests. Why then would you agree to sign on to these findings and not say, we're not going to put pen to paper, we need more time, the commissioners need to go, no immunity for whatever they're saying, even though they're claiming innocence. But to some extent, the country just feels like they were held hostage to this process, and then we come out and we say, oh, you know, all's well and good now that you've sat down with Jubilee, that it almost seems like the whole aim of this exercise was to get out these commissioners and put in new ones.
Yvonne, in politics, you must agree to give and take. And to exercise statecraft, you cannot always insist on your position. There are some times when you have to make decisions for the interest of the country. If you're going to be the Puritan, if you're going to be the one who says that things must go my way, then the country is going to burn. You saw the country was taking a very dangerous turn. It was not, we were not saying that the people who run business in this country are Jubilee supporters. It is ordinary Kenyans who are either Jubilee or in CORD. We wanted a situation where the temperatures in this country would be cooled down so that we have a settlement that can give hope to this country.
Are you happy with that final settlement?
Yes, I don't have to be 100% happy, but to a greater extent, Yvonne, I think the fair question is a glass half full or is a glass half empty? In my view, the glass is half full because we have made some gains that we wouldn't have made. Now, I also agree with George's assertion that the scope of this committee was so narrow that the serious challenges facing this nation could not have been resolved in 30 days. For example, the issue of ID issuance. The electoral system relies so much on the system of ID issuance. Yet the county where I come from, which is a border county, we've got serious barriers to young women, particularly married women, getting identity cards. This committee did not get into the depth of that because that is a starting point. Even if you're going to conduct an audit of the voters register, it starts from the issuance of the identity card.
Okay.
So the scope and the time was not adequate, and I still believe that this country needs another forum where we discuss other pertinent issues, which is not just electoral issues. There's a whole issue of integration and cohesion. We have an integration plan going into the next elections, and this select committee was not the silver bullet to the problems that we face as a country.
Okay, your final comments?
Yvonne, it's very interesting that my colleagues here would want to eat their cake and still have it. One, it is improper to come here and say that we need a national dialogue, that the problems that came in 2007 were the same problems that presented themselves in 2013. In 2007, this country did not have a new constitution. And this new constitution, which we bequeathed to ourselves in 2010, was as a result of negotiated settlement that had taken place for over 10 years. Remember, before that, we had the so-called IPPG, which had settled this issue of the electoral process. But when we Kenyans, in our wisdom, and even went through a referendum, came up with a constitution that was meant to settle issues that had been antagonizing us as a community once and for all, we committed that document to be the document that will determine the way our lives will be governed henceforth. And therefore, we cannot say that 5 years, 6 years down the line, we need another national dialogue on a few issues as and when they arise.
Okay.
That is simply out. Coming back to what...
Very quickly, because the music is telling us it's time to go.
What my colleague has just said here. It is shocking that all along, CORD did not have evidence, that they now needed more time to bring evidence before the Orengo Kiraitu committee. Why were you allowing Kenyans to be killed?
No, but
why were you allowing these people to be shot dead?
All the petitions.
Because they should have come even 1 hour. I gave you time to talk.
All right.
It should have been fair that even 1 minute, if you are given to table, this is the evidence we have been talking all along. Why did you cause innocent blood to be spilled only to say...
Why did you kill innocent people?
Only to say that you did not have
kill
facts.
innocent people in the name of defending a commission?
I would like to give
the commission
George
is going out.
30 seconds. Where do we go from here?
Jubilee wins, as it was going to, because Jubilee has acted the bully. It has left it until very late for anything to be done. CORD actually could do nothing about the situation, so the Jubilee wants the status quo, and by refusing to negotiate, the default point is the status quo. So we have had a process and some drama and a committee, some promises of reforms. They are really false, and the country hasn't moved an inch forward towards securing the next elections. We still have the problems of 2013, and
so you think it's a band-aid solution? But rather not looking at the deeper issues?
Yes, it doesn't even solve the issues that it said it was going to solve. And for Nyango Law and his party, because they're in charge of the country, they've got to be worried that they're going to lead the country into another election when the country remains angry about the fact that really the vote means nothing, and they've done nothing through whatever processes that we've had, and they've had opportunity to do something about it, but they've done nothing. Okay. So I think we're in a dangerous situation, and this is what we've always said.
All right, we have to leave it at that for now. Thank you very much. Do you agree with what our panelists have said tonight? Thank you very much. George Kegoro, Senator Moses Kajwang, and Onyango Law from TNA. We thank you very much for your time, and we look to see what happens now as it gets tabled in Parliament this week. What are your views? Do you think this was a band-aid solution? Do you think it was the best solution with the time given and under the circumstances? Please do keep your thoughts coming in. The hashtag is Checkpoint, even as we gear towards a holistic discussion regarding elections and democracy in this country. You're watching Checkpoint. We'll be right back.